A quick heads up. This story delves into themes of mystery, psychological suspense, and unsettling secrets. Listener discretion is advised. What if the most idyllic place you could ever imagine, a picture-perfect sanctuary where every blade of grass was a testament to flawless living, was actually a meticulously constructed stage for something truly monstrous? What if the quiet hum of suburban perfection was just the soundtrack to a secret so dark, it could unravel an entire community? I moved to Willow Creek Estates for the peace, the escape, the promise of that very perfection. After years of city noise and cramped apartments, the idea of a cul-de-sac, with its manicured lawns and gentle curves, felt like stepping into a dream. Evergreen Way was the crown jewel of Willow Creek, a small horseshoe-shaped street where every house gleamed, every mailbox stood at attention, and every single lawn was, without exception, a vibrant, emerald carpet. It was the kind of place where children rode bikes with training wheels, where neighborhood watch signs were more for decoration than necessity, and where the biggest scandal was usually Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias wilting in a heat wave. But even before I unpacked the last box, before the scent of fresh paint faded from my new living room, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor of unease started to ripple beneath that pristine surface. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, not at first. Just a feeling. A sense that the perfection wasn't natural. It was too perfect. Like a painting that's been retouched one too many times, until the life has been airbrushed out, leaving behind only an unsettling, idealized shell. My house was number 12. Directly across from me, at the head of the cul-de-sac, was number 14. That was the Caldwell's house. Richard and Emily Caldwell. Their lawn wasn't just perfect, it was legendary. People from other parts of Willow Creek would sometimes slow their cars just to admire it. A deep uniform green without a single weed, a stray brown patch, or even a blade out of place. It was the kind of lawn that made you wonder if they had individual grass stylists on retainer. It was the standard, the unspoken challenge, that every other homeowner on Evergreen Way subtly, almost desperately tried to meet. My own lawn, which I thought was respectable, felt like an unruly patch of dandelions next to the Caldwell's masterpiece. The Caldwells themselves were an enigma. They were rarely seen. Their blinds were almost always drawn, even on the brightest summer days. You'd catch glimpses of Richard, a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 40s, pulling out of the driveway in a dark sedan precisely at 7:30 a.m. and returning precisely at 6:15 p.m. Emily, a slender woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, was even more elusive. I'd seen her once, briefly, collecting mail, her face serene, almost doll-like. They didn't participate in the occasional block parties, politely declining invitations with pre-printed cards. They were the quiet, almost invisible core of the cul-de-sac's perfection. At first, I chalked it up to them being private people. Maybe they worked from home, or had demanding careers that didn't allow for casual neighborhood chats. But as the weeks turned into months, my initial curiosity began to curdle into something else. Something colder. It was the little things. The way the mailman always left their packages at the very edge of the porch, never daring to step closer to the gleaming front door. The way the neighborhood kids, boisterous and fearless everywhere else, would instinctively lower their voices, almost tiptoe, when their games drifted near number 14. One afternoon, a stray baseball, hit with surprising force by young Ethan Miller from number 10, bounced off the Caldwell's perfectly manicured rose bush and landed squarely in the middle of their perfect lawn. The entire cul-de-sac seemed to hold its breath. Ethan froze, his eyes wide with terror. His father, Michael Miller, stepped forward, a hesitant apology already forming on his lips. But before he could even reach the edge of the Caldwell's property, the front door of number 14 opened. Richard Caldwell stood there, a faint, unreadable smile on his face. He didn't say a word. He simply walked onto the lawn, picked up the baseball with a gloved hand, a gardening glove I noticed even though he wasn't gardening, and placed it gently on the sidewalk just outside his property line. Then, without a glance at Michael or Ethan, he returned inside, closing the door with a soft, almost imperceptible click. The whole interaction lasted maybe 90 seconds. No anger, no irritation, just a chillingly precise boundary enforcement. That night, I found myself staring out my living room window at number 14. The streetlights cast long, unmoving shadows. The Caldwell's house was a dark, silent monolith, its perfection somehow more menacing in the gloom. I noticed something else then, something I hadn't paid much attention to before. a faint, almost inaudible hum. It seemed to emanate from beneath their perfect lawn, a low, consistent thrumming, like a distant industrial refrigerator. It was barely there, easily dismissed as the ambient noise of a quiet night, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it. It was constant, day and night. My wife Jessica laughed it off. "You're getting stir-crazy, Alex," she'd say. "It's a quiet neighborhood. Maybe it's their AC unit, or some fancy irrigation system." But even as she said it, I could see a flicker of unease in her own eyes. She'd noticed the drawn blinds, the distant Caldwells. She'd seen the baseball incident. She was just better at rationalizing it away. I tried to get answers, subtle ones, from other neighbors. Sarah Jenkins from number 8 was the neighborhood gossip, usually a font of information on everything from who was having an affair to whose teenager was throwing unsupervised parties. But mention the Caldwells, and her usual effervescent chatter would dry up. Her eyes would dart towards number 14, a nervous smile would plaster itself on her face, and she'd quickly pivot to a detailed account of her struggling zucchini plant. It was always the same: a polite deflection, a sudden lack of memory, a hasty change of subject. It was as if an unspoken pact existed on Evergreen Way. You admired the Caldwells' lawn, you respected their privacy, and you certainly didn't ask questions. But I couldn't stop. The hum beneath their lawn, the impenetrable silence of their house, the almost militant perfection of their property. It all started to feel less like eccentricity and more like a deliberate concealment. What were they hiding behind that flawless facade? Why the secrecy? And what was so important that it required such extreme measures to maintain an illusion of normalcy? One evening, after a particularly heavy rain, I was outside, checking my own gutters. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and petrichor. As I walked along the edge of my property, near the boundary with the Caldwells' impeccable yard, I noticed something truly bizarre. The Caldwells' lawn, despite the deluge, was completely dry. Not just surface dry, but as if the rain hadn't even touched it. My lawn was saturated, squishy underfoot. Theirs was firm, resilient, almost artificial. It repelled the water. I knelt down, pretending to tie my shoe, and ran my hand over the turf. It felt like grass, smelled like grass, but there was a strange, almost rubbery quality to it, a density that was profoundly unnatural. And then I saw it. Just at the very edge, where the grass met the concrete curb, a tiny seam. A hairline fracture in the illusion. It was almost perfectly hidden, a precise cut, as if the entire lawn was not rooted in the earth, but laid down in meticulous sections. My breath hitched. The hum, faintly audible even now, suddenly seemed louder, more sinister. The perfection wasn't organic. It was engineered. It was constructed. And if the lawn itself was a meticulously crafted cover, what exactly was it covering? My heart hammered against my ribs as a terrifying thought took root. The perfect lawn in the Cul de Sac didn't just hide a secret. The perfect lawn was the secret. And something, perhaps something unspeakably dark, lay directly beneath it. The cold, heavy disc felt like a lead weight in my palm, an anchor pulling me into a current I didn't understand. I scrambled back to my house, the adrenaline still coursing through me, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The front door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing in the sudden silence of my living room. I leaned against it, gasping, trying to process what had just happened. The disc. I held it up to the light, turning it over and over. It was perfectly circular, about 3 inches in diameter, with a thickness that suggested immense density. No seams, no screws, no discernible markings whatsoever. It was smooth, almost polished, yet somehow absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It felt ancient, yet impossibly pristine. There was no way this was just some discarded piece of metal. It felt purposeful, alien. The word whispered itself in my mind, and I shivered despite the warmth of the room. I placed it on my coffee table, then immediately regretted it. It looked out of place, a dark, silent sentinel on the polished wood. I paced, my eyes darting between the disc and the window that overlooked the cul-de-sac. Was Mr. Henderson out there right now, searching for it? Did he even know it was gone? A cold dread settled in my stomach. What if this disc was important? What if it was a key or a sensor or something worse? Sleep was a distant memory that night. Every rustle of leaves outside, every creak of the old house, sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept imagining Mr. Henderson's gaunt face appearing at my window, his eyes narrowed, demanding his property back. The disc, wrapped in a dish towel, sat hidden deep within a kitchen drawer. But its presence was palpable, a silent hum vibrating through the floorboards, through my very bones. I felt its weight even when it was out of sight. The next morning, the cul-de-sac seemed to hum with an unnatural quiet. The usual sounds of morning birds chirping, distant traffic, the occasional dog bark were muted, as if absorbed by the pristine lawns. Mr. Henderson was out, of course, already tending to his sacred patch. He moved with the same methodical precision, his gaze fixed on the grass, but I noticed something new. Every now and then, his head would snap up, his eyes sweeping across the houses, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on mine. Was it paranoia, or did he know? I spent the day glued to my window, a mug of cold coffee forgotten in my hand. My meticulous nature, once a source of comfort, had now twisted into a hypervigilance. I cataloged every movement Mr. Henderson made, every tool he used, the exact path he took around his lawn. I noticed he spent an unusual amount of time near the very edge of his property, close to where I'd found the disc. He'd stoop, run his gloved hand over the grass, almost as if he was searching for something. My breath hitched. He was searching for it. He knew. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I had something he wanted, something he clearly valued. What would he do to get it back? This wasn't just about a perfect lawn anymore. It was about stakes I couldn't comprehend. I needed answers, and the internet, usually a vast ocean of information, felt like my only recourse. I typed in vague descriptions: heavy metal disc, no markings, ancient artifact, smooth, unidentified metal object, cul-de-sac. The results were a frustrating mix of conspiracy theories, geological oddities, and historical curiosities, none of which matched the peculiar feel of the disc in my drawer. No alien spacecraft fragments, no secret government listening devices, no ancient civilization relics that looked anything like this. It was as if the object defied categorization, existing outside the known world. The isolation deepened. I was holding something unique, and terrifyingly, I was alone in knowing about it. My gaze drifted from the screen to the cul-de-sac. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows. Mrs. Gable, an older woman with a perpetually cheerful demeanor and a penchant for elaborate garden gnomes, was watering her petunias a few houses down. I considered approaching her. She'd lived here for decades, knew everyone and everything. But what would I say? "Excuse me, Mrs. Gable, have you ever noticed anything strange about Mr. Henderson's lawn? Specifically a heavy, featureless metal disc buried near its edge?" She'd think I was mad. Or worse, she might be in on it, whatever it was. The thought, however absurd, made me hesitate. Instead, I saw Michael and Sarah Miller, the younger couple who lived directly across from Mr. Henderson. They were in their front yard, attempting to wrangle their rambunctious golden retriever, Buster. They were new to the cul-de-sac, only moved in about a year ago, but they seemed friendly enough, often waving or exchanging pleasantries. They were also the only other residents who didn't seem to have the same obsessive devotion to their lawn. Theirs was well maintained, but not perfect. It had a few dandelions, a patch of clover, a sign of normalcy. Taking a deep breath, I walked over, forcing a casual smile. "Hey, Michael, Sarah. Buster looks like he's having a blast." Michael chuckled, wrestling a muddy tennis ball from Buster's mouth. "He's decided the entire cul-de-sac is his personal obstacle course today." Sarah smiled, wiping a stray strand of hair from her face. "Just trying to survive another afternoon. How are you settling in?" "Good, good," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just enjoying the peace and quiet. It's certainly a very neat neighborhood." I tried to inject a hint of irony into the last word, hoping they'd pick up on it. Michael shrugged. "Yeah, everyone takes their lawns pretty seriously around here. Especially Mr. Henderson. I swear, that man must have a team of horticulturalists working overnight." He gestured vaguely towards Mr. Henderson's house with his chin. "He certainly does," I agreed, trying to keep my voice even. "I've never seen a lawn quite like it. It's almost too perfect, isn't it?" Sarah frowned slightly. "It is a bit much. I mean, we try, but I just can't get ours to look like that. It's like his grass is a different species." Michael laughed. "Maybe he uses some secret fertilizer. Or he's got a deal with the gnomes. Or something else entirely," I murmured almost to myself. They didn't seem to hear me. My subtle probing was failing. They saw it as an eccentricity, not a mystery. "You know," Sarah continued, The oddest thing is, I've never seen anyone else doing anything like that here. No other professional lawn care services. Just him out there every single day. He's dedicated, I'll give him that, Michael added. But sometimes it feels a little intense. Like he's guarding something. He said the last part with a light laugh, but his eyes, for a brief moment, met mine, and there was a flicker of something there. Something that wasn't entirely a joke. A seed of doubt, perhaps, that I hadn't noticed before. My heart gave a little lurch. Guarding something? I repeated, trying to keep my voice light. Like his prize-winning grass? Michael just shrugged again, but the laughter was gone from his eyes. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, we should probably get Buster inside before he digs up Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias. Nice talking to you. As I walked back to my house, their words echoed in my head. Guarding something. Michael had said it almost as a joke, but the way he looked at me, the way his eyes held that brief, fleeting uncertainty, suggested he might have felt it too. Or maybe my own paranoia was projecting onto him. That night, the disc felt heavier in its drawer. Its silent presence a constant thrum beneath the surface of my consciousness. The cul-de-sac was bathed in moonlight, an eerie silver glow illuminating Mr. Henderson's lawn, making it seem even more otherworldly. I couldn't shake the feeling that Michael's half-joke held more truth than he realized. Mr. Henderson was guarding something, and the perfect lawn, I now understood, was not just a facade. It was a shield, an impenetrable barrier designed to hide what lay beneath. I crept to my window, peering out into the silent night. The air was still, save for the faint whisper of the wind through the leaves. My eyes were drawn inexorably to Mr. Henderson's lawn. It shimmered under the moonlight, an emerald carpet of impossible perfection. But tonight, for the first time, I noticed something else. Something subtle, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. A faint rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat, emanating from deep within the grass itself. It wasn't visible, not exactly, but I felt it, a low thrumming vibration that resonated through the ground, through the very air. And then I heard it. A sound so faint it could have been my imagination. A low, consistent hum. Not unlike the buzz of a distant transformer, but deeper, more organic. It was coming from under the lawn. The perfect lawn wasn't just hiding a secret. It was keeping something alive. Something that pulsed and hummed, buried beneath the meticulously manicured blades. And I had a piece of it, a cold, silent piece hidden in my kitchen drawer. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. A chilling certainty that I had stumbled into something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my kitchen. I stared at the closed drawer, as if the small, unnatural piece of turf could somehow escape and expose itself. It wasn't just grass. Not real grass, not in the way I understood it. The blades, so uniformly green, so unnaturally stiff, felt wrong. I had pulled it out of the ground, and it had come away with a surprising resistance, almost like it was anchored deeper than it should be, yet without the usual root system. It was a dense mat, a perfectly engineered patch of something that looked like life but felt like a fabrication. I opened the drawer again, pulling out the small plastic baggie I'd hastily shoved it into. Under the harsh kitchen light, the specimen revealed its true strangeness. Each blade was identical, a perfect miniature replica of the one next to it. There was no variation in color, no slight imperfection, no hint of organic growth. It was like 1,000 tiny, identical green needles, woven together with an unseen, almost invisible network that held them rigidly in place. It wasn't synthetic, not exactly. It had a faint earthy smell, but it was overshadowed by something else, something sterile and metallic like a laboratory. My mind raced, trying to reconcile what I held with what I knew about botany, about nature, about reality. It defied everything. The initial shock gave way to a cold, analytical dread. This wasn't just a quirky landscaping choice. This was deliberate. This was engineered. And the Millers, the new, perfectly polite, perfectly private couple, were behind it. What kind of people would cultivate something so profoundly unnatural, and why? The question gnawed at me, a sharp, insistent pain behind my eyes. I couldn't just throw it away. I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen it, hadn't touched it, hadn't taken it. I was implicated, a silent witness now holding a piece of the puzzle. Sleep became an impossible luxury. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. I found myself drawn to my living room window, peering through the blinds at the Miller's house across the cul-de-sac. Their lights were out, the house a dark, silent monolith under the streetlights. The perfect lawn glowed faintly, an ethereal green carpet under the moon, mocking the natural world around it. It looked almost luminous, not reflecting light, but subtly emitting it. Was that my imagination, fueled by fear, or was there something truly otherworldly about it? The next morning, the cul-de-sac felt different. The usual cheerful chirping of birds seemed muted, the morning sun less inviting. Every glance from a neighbor felt like an interrogation. Had anyone else noticed? Was I the only one seeing the cracks in the facade? I walked my dog, Buster, a shaggy golden retriever mix who usually greeted every passerby with a wagging tail and an expectant sniff. Today, Buster was subdued, his nose to the ground, pulling me away from the miller's perfectly manicured property, almost as if he sensed the underlying wrongness. It wasn't like him. Buster usually loved to investigate. As I passed Jessica's house, directly opposite the miller's, she was out watering her hydrangeas. Jessica, with her bright smile and perpetually cheerful disposition, was the self-appointed social hub of our little street. She waved, her smile seeming a little forced today. "Morning, Michael," she called out, her voice a little higher pitched than usual. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is, Jessica," I replied, trying to sound normal, trying to ignore the piece of alien turf in my kitchen drawer. "Everything all right?" She hesitated, then sighed, lowering her watering can. "Honestly, Michael, I'm a little freaked out. It's the Millers. They're just so quiet. I mean, I tried to bring over a welcome casserole last week. You know, the usual cul-de-sac welcome. Sarah was polite, of course, but she practically took the dish from my hands at the door and closed it before I could even ask if they needed anything. Didn't invite me in for a minute, didn't even make eye contact for more than a second. It was unsettling." I nodded, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "I know what you mean. They're very private." "Private is one thing," Jessica continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But it's more than that. I haven't seen them out at all, except for David meticulously tending that lawn of theirs. And even then, he never looks up. It's like they're living in a bubble. And their curtains are always drawn. Always." She shivered, despite the warmth of the morning. "It just gives me the creeps, you know? Like they're hiding something." My heart pounded. She hadn't seen it, the unnaturalness of the lawn itself, but she was sensing the same unsettling aura. "Maybe they're just adjusting," I offered weakly, though I didn't believe it myself. "Maybe," Jessica said, but her eyes, usually so bright, were clouded with concern. "Oh, and you know what else is weird? Mark from down the street? He told me his cat, Mittens, disappeared last week. Mittens never goes far. And then a couple of days later, Emily's little terrier, Sparky, just vanished too. No trace. They were both usually so contained to their own yards. It's just odd, isn't it? 2 pets gone within days, from a cul-de-sac where nothing ever happens." My breath hitched. Missing pets. The perfect lawn. The sterile metallic smell. A chilling connection began to form in my mind, a horrifying hypothesis that I immediately tried to push away. No, it couldn't be. That was too far-fetched, too monstrous. I mumbled a quick goodbye to Jessica, my mind reeling, and practically dragged Buster back to my house. The silence inside felt oppressive. I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and sat in the dim light, the piece of turf still in its baggie on my kitchen counter. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the pets just wandered off. Maybe the Millers were just introverted. Maybe the turf was a new experimental type of synthetic grass that just looked unsettling. But the metallic smell, the perfect uniformity, the way it felt, it screamed unnatural. And Jessica's observations about the Millers' reclusiveness, their drawn curtains, their almost robotic dedication to the lawn, all fit too perfectly into the emerging, terrifying picture. I knew I couldn't go to the police. What would I say? "Officer, my new neighbors have a suspiciously perfect lawn, and I stole a piece of it. And I think it's weird, and now 2 pets are missing?" I sound like a lunatic. No, this was something I had to investigate myself. But how? And what was I even looking for? I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my thoughts circling the Miller house like a vulture. I watched them, or tried to. Their routine was maddeningly consistent. Lights out by 10 p.m. No activity until 7 a.m. David would emerge precisely at 7:30 a.m. to meticulously inspect the lawn, sometimes running a small silent machine over it that hummed with a low, almost imperceptible frequency. Sarah I saw even less. Only fleeting glimpses of her moving behind the drawn curtains, a shadow against the dim light within. That evening, as dusk settled, I noticed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from the miller's property. It wasn't loud enough to be heard clearly, but rather a vibration I felt more than heard, a low thrumming that seemed to resonate in the very air. It was similar to the sound I imagined their silent lawn machine made, but constant. It was subtle, easily dismissed as the hum of the neighborhood power lines or my own imagination. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it. It was like a low-frequency pulse, a heartbeat beneath the perfect facade. My fear sharpened into something colder, something more determined. I wasn't just curious anymore. I was genuinely afraid, not just for myself, but for the entire cul de sac. The missing pets, the strange turf, the reclusive millers, the constant hum. It all painted a picture of something deeply wrong. I needed to get closer to understand what was really happening on that perfect lawn. But how could I do that without drawing attention to myself? The thought of being discovered, of being noticed by the millers, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. They were hiding something and I was getting too close. The cul-de-sac, once my sanctuary, now felt like a carefully constructed trap, and I was already inside. The cul-de-sac, once my sanctuary, now felt like a carefully constructed trap, and I was already inside. The realization hung heavy in the air, pressing down on me, stealing the oxygen from my lungs. Every shadow outside my window seemed to lengthen, to twist into something watchful. David Miller's gaze, those unsettlingly calm eyes, had pierced through my casual observation, through my carefully cultivated anonymity. He hadn't just seen me, he had acknowledged me, and that acknowledgement was a silent threat, a declaration that the game had changed. Sleep became a distant, forgotten concept. My mind raced, replaying every interaction, every fleeting glance, every whisper of wind through the meticulously trimmed hedges. The perfection of the miller's lawn, once a comforting sight, now felt like a meticulously painted stage, hiding a dark, sprawling drama beneath its vibrant green. What was so important about that lawn? What secret was so vital it required such an unyielding, almost obsessive level of control? I found myself pacing my living room, the floorboards creaking a rhythm to my frantic thoughts. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that it was simple paranoia, but the cold dread that had settled in my stomach refused to budge. The millers weren't just private, they were secretive. And secrets, especially in a place like Harmony Lane, had a way of festering. The silence of the night, usually so comforting, now felt like a predatory calm, a held breath before something unseen struck. The next morning, I forced myself to maintain a semblance of normalcy. I watered my own, decidedly imperfect, lawn, checked the mail, even waved to Mrs. Henderson across the street as she wrestled with her overflowing recycling bin. But beneath the veneer of routine, my senses were on high alert. Every car that passed, every door that opened, every distant conversation was meticulously catalogued, analyzed for any deviation from the cul-de-sac's monotonous hum. The very air felt different, charged with an unspoken tension, and I was the only one who seemed to feel it. The miller's house remained a fortress of calm. David's car was gone by 7, Emily's by 8. Their routine was clockwork, unyielding in its precision. But as I watched, a tiny detail snagged my attention. A delivery truck, not a UPS or FedEx, but a generic white van with no discernible logo, pulled up to their driveway. It wasn't unusual for deliveries, but the driver, a burly man with a baseball cap pulled low, didn't just drop off a package. He spent a good 5 minutes at the back of the van, seemingly struggling with something heavy. Then he maneuvered a large rectangular wooden crate, easily 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, onto a dolly and wheeled it to the miller's side door, not the front. My heart hammered against my ribs. A crate? What would require such a delivery? It looked too substantial for typical household goods, too anonymous for a specialized piece of equipment. As the driver rang the doorbell, Emily Miller appeared almost instantly, her usual composed smile firmly in place. She signed for the delivery, exchanged a few brief words with the driver, and then, with surprising strength, helped him guide the heavy crate inside, out of sight. The entire interaction was swift, efficient, and utterly devoid of the usual neighborly small talk. No lingering, no polite pleasantries. Just business, conducted with an unnerving efficiency that belied the apparent weight and bulk of the delivery. The white van drove off, leaving behind only tire marks on the asphalt, and a fresh wave of suspicion in my mind. A crate. delivered to the side door. And Emily, usually so delicate, handling it with such ease. It didn't fit. Nothing about the Millers truly fit the picture they so carefully painted. It was a crack in their perfect veneer, a glimpse into something far more complex and unsettling. That afternoon I decided to take a walk, a casual stroll around the cul de sac, but with a purpose. I needed to get closer to see if anything else seemed amiss. I walked past the Miller's house, my eyes darting, trying to appear nonchalant while taking in every detail. The windows were pristine, reflecting the cloudless sky. The hedges were immaculate. The lawn, as always, was a verdant carpet, practically glowing with its unnaturally vibrant green. Then I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible discoloration on the edge of their lawn, near the rose bushes that bordered their property line with the Thompsons. It was a patch no bigger than my palm, where the grass was a shade lighter, almost yellowish, compared to the surrounding emerald green. It was so minor, so easily dismissed that I almost walked past it. But my heightened senses, sharpened by paranoia, latched onto it with a desperate intensity. It was a scar, a tiny, almost invisible imperfection in their flawless facade. And it was precisely the kind of detail that screamed intentional. No natural lawn would have such a perfectly defined, slightly discolored patch. It looked like something had been moved or perhaps planted there. The edges were too neat, the change in color too abrupt to be anything organic. My mind raced. Could it be related to the crate? Too small, surely. But it suggested disturbance. It suggested something had been done to the lawn, something that even their meticulous care couldn't entirely erase. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. What kind of disturbance? What could be so significant that it left such a subtle yet damning mark on their prized possession? I continued my walk, trying to process this new observation. The cul-de-sac felt different now, imbued with a new layer of artificiality. Every perfect lawn, every cheerful wave, every polite smile seemed to mock me, to hide something far more sinister. I felt like a detective in a meticulously crafted diorama, where every piece was placed just so, and only a fool would question the narrative. But I wasn't a fool. I was a man caught in a web of unsettling curiosity, and I couldn't unsee what I had seen. The perfection, I realized, was not a sign of peace, but of control, a suffocating grip on appearances. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a new thought struck me. The Millers had noticed me watching. They knew. What did that mean for me? Were they simply aware, or were they actively monitoring me now? The idea sent a chill down my spine. The hunter had become the hunted. Or perhaps the curious bystander had become an unwelcome witness, one who had seen too much. I decided I needed to be more careful but also more deliberate. Subtlety was key. I couldn't afford to be caught again, not if I wanted to uncover the truth. I needed to find a way to observe without being observed, to gather information without raising further alarms. The stakes had clearly been raised, and my continued curiosity was now a dangerous gamble. My gaze drifted back to the Miller's house, now a silhouette against the fading light. The side door, where the crate had been delivered, was barely visible from my vantage point, but I remembered its location, and I remembered the small, almost perfect discolored patch on the lawn. The silence of the cul-de-sac deepened as night fell. Only the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of the freeway broke the stillness. But within that stillness, my mind was alight, buzzing with questions. What was in that crate? What was hidden beneath that almost perfect patch of grass? And what would happen if I tried to find out? A sudden sharp movement caught my eye. David Miller. He was out on his lawn, not mowing, not watering, but simply standing there, in the deepening twilight, staring intently at the very patch of grass I had noticed earlier. He wasn't bending down, not touching it, just observing it, his posture rigid, almost protective. It was a fleeting moment, a ghostly tableau in the fading light, but it confirmed my suspicions. That patch mattered. It mattered to him. Then, as if sensing my gaze even through the darkness, David slowly turned his head. His eyes, though obscured by the night, felt like they were fixed directly on my window. A cold wave washed over me, a primal fear seizing my throat. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just stood there, a silent sentinel, before turning and disappearing into the shadows of his perfect home. I instinctively recoiled from the window, my heart pounding a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. He knew. He definitely knew. The casual observer had been unmasked, and the rules of engagement had been brutally clarified. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a confrontation, albeit a silent, terrifying one. The game wasn't just changed, it was personal. And I was no longer just an observer. I was a participant whether I liked it or not. The darkness outside felt heavier now, charged with unseen eyes. The perfect lawn wasn't just hiding a secret, it was actively guarding it. A silent, emerald barrier protecting something profound and potentially dangerous. And I, by daring to peer too closely, had just been issued a chilling nonverbal warning to stay away. But the warning, instead of deterring me, only fueled a desperate, reckless resolve. Fear mingled with a stubborn, almost obsessive need to understand. How could I turn back now, knowing what I knew, feeling the weight of their silent scrutiny? The image of that heavy crate, the bizarrely discolored patch of grass, David's unblinking stare. They coalesced into an irresistible puzzle. I was in too deep to turn back now, to simply retreat into the comfortable anonymity of my own imperfect life. The secrets of Harmony Lane and the Millers were waiting, simmering beneath the surface of their meticulously maintained facade. And I, for better or worse, was going to find them no matter the cost. The cul-de-sac had become a labyrinth, and I was determined to navigate its twisting paths, even if it meant confronting the monster at its heart. My resolve hardened, each blade of grass in Michael's yard now a potential clue, a fragment of the carefully constructed lie. I started my investigation with the most obvious, yet most unsettling aspect of the cul-de-sac, the lawns themselves. Every morning I watched, not just Michael but David and even the less obsessive residents like Sarah and Tom down the street. There was a rhythm, a silent, unspoken pact in their routines. It wasn't just about curb appeal. It was about absolute, uncompromising uniformity. I noticed the precise timing of Michael's watering schedule, almost to the minute, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday morning at 6 a.m. Jessica, his wife, would sometimes be out tending to her rose bushes, a serene smile plastered on her face, but her eyes, I noticed, subtly tracked my own movements if I happened to be outside. It was a fleeting glance, easily dismissed, but I was no longer in the mood to dismiss anything. The sheer volume of water they used was staggering. Michael's sprinklers, and indeed those of most of the cul-de-sac, seemed to drench the lawns, yet I never saw puddles, never saw runoff staining the pristine sidewalks, never saw the earth oversaturated. It was as if the ground itself was a sponge, absorbing everything without a trace, faster than any soil I'd ever encountered. This wasn't just good drainage, it felt supernatural. One afternoon, after a particularly heavy rain shower had passed, I took a walk. My umbrella was still dripping, but the lawns were already drying at an impossible rate. I walked past Michael's house, then David's, pretending to admire a particularly vibrant patch of petunias near their mailbox. My eyes, however, were scanning the ground, searching for anything amiss. And then I saw it, nestled subtly amidst a cluster of perfectly manicured hostas at the very edge of Michael's property, almost where his lawn met the small manicured common area of the cul-de-sac, was a small, almost flush with the ground metal grate. It was dark, almost black, blending seamlessly with the rich soil and shadowed by the dense foliage. It wasn't a standard storm drain, which were larger and more obvious. This was smaller, perhaps 8 inches by 8 inches, with fine, almost hair-thin slits. It was too small for typical surface runoff from a large lawn, and yet it was impeccably clean, free of any debris. It looked like a ventilation cover, or perhaps a very specialized drainage system. But for what? My heart began to pound with a dull, insistent rhythm against my ribs. This was new. This was different. I crouched down, pretending to tie my shoe, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth metal. It was heavy, firmly secured, and gave no hint of what lay beneath. The slits were too narrow to peer through effectively, offering only glimpses of impenetrable darkness. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the post-rain dampness. This wasn't just about perfect lawns, it was about what they were hiding. I straightened up, my mind racing. What could necessitate such a covert drainage system? Or was it for something else entirely? A ventilation system for an underground structure? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The cul-de-sac was built on solid ground as far as I knew. No basements were common here, certainly not large, communal ones. But this grate suggested otherwise. Over the next few days, I found myself drawn to that spot like a moth to a flame. I observed Michael's routine with renewed intensity, After his morning watering, I noticed he would occasionally walk over to that exact spot, not to inspect it but almost to acknowledge it. A quick glance, a subtle shift in his posture, a momentary hesitation in his stride. It was barely perceptible, but I was looking for it now. I was looking for any crack in the facade. One evening, under the cloak of twilight, I decided to be bolder. I waited until I knew Michael and Jessica were inside, their living room lights casting a warm glow through their front window. My own heart hammered as I walked casually towards the common area, then veered towards the edge of Michael's lawn. I knelt again, this time pulling out a small, powerful flashlight from my pocket, a habit from my days of late-night walks. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the fine slits of the grate. I pressed my eye close, trying to discern anything beyond the immediate darkness. Nothing, just an inky void. But then, as I held my breath, I thought I detected a faint, almost imperceptible current of air, a whisper of a draft emanating from the slits. It was so subtle I questioned if it was just my imagination, fueled by paranoia. But it felt real. It felt like something was breathing beneath the perfect lawn. Suddenly, a voice cut through the stillness, making me jump, my flashlight beam scattering wildly across the shrubs. "Everything all right there, neighbor?" I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. David stood on his own lawn, hands tucked into his pockets, a casual smile on his face, but his eyes, even in the dim light, seemed sharper, more discerning than usual. He had a glass of something in his hand, condensation beading on its surface. He looked perfectly at ease, as if he'd just stepped out for some fresh air. But I knew better. He was watching me. He had been for a while, I realized with a sickening jolt. "Oh, David," I stammered, trying to regain my composure. "Just admiring Michael's landscaping. He really does have the greenest thumb, doesn't he?" I feigned a chuckle, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. David's smile didn't waver, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "He certainly does. Takes a lot of effort, you know, especially to keep it looking like that." He took a slow sip from his glass, his gaze lingering on me, then briefly flicking towards the grate I had just been examining. "Some might say it's an obsession, but it keeps the cul-de-sac looking pristine, doesn't it?" "Pristine indeed?" I mumbled, feeling an icy dread creeping up my spine. My attempt at casualness was failing miserably. I felt exposed, caught. "Well, don't let the evening chill catch you out there too long," David said, his voice still perfectly pleasant, almost friendly. "Wouldn't want to catch a cold." He gave a small nod, then turned and walked back into his house, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. I stood there for a long moment, the faint scent of freshly cut grass and something vaguely metallic hanging in the air. The interaction had been brief, seemingly innocuous, but it had felt like a warning. David hadn't questioned my presence, hadn't asked why I was crouched by Michael's shrubs. He hadn't needed to. He knew. And his words, "Takes a lot of effort, obsession, keeps the cul-de-sac looking pristine," echoed in my ears, suddenly taking on a far more sinister meaning. The cul-de-sac wasn't just hiding a secret, it was actively guarding it. And I had just been caught trying to peek behind the curtain. The air draft I thought I'd felt from the grate now seemed less like imagination, and more like a silent breath from something ancient and hidden beneath the earth. I knew then, with chilling certainty, that I had just crossed a line, and the monster at the heart of the cul-de-sac had just noticed. The cold dread that had seized me didn't loosen its grip for days. It clung to me like a shroud, a constant, chilling reminder of the revelation in my own backyard. The earth, the very ground beneath my feet, was not inert. It was a membrane, thin and fragile, separating my world from something ancient and unspeakable. And I, in my foolish curiosity, had torn a hole in it. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every creak of the house became a warning. The cul-de-sac, once a symbol of suburban tranquility, now felt like a meticulously crafted stage for a silent, unseen drama. And I, the unwitting intruder, was suddenly center stage, illuminated by a spotlight I couldn't perceive but acutely felt. The monster had noticed. The words echoed in my mind, a terrifying mantra. I tried to rationalize it away. Sleep deprivation, an overactive imagination, the stress of a new neighborhood. But the memory of the ground pulsing, the faint organic scent that had risen from the earth, the sudden profound stillness of the air. It was too vivid, too visceral to dismiss. My logical mind, usually my most trusted ally, was failing me. It was being drowned out by an instinctual primal fear. I found myself watching the Miller's house with an intensity that bordered on obsession. David and Emily, with their perpetually cheerful demeanor and their impossibly perfect lawn, became the focal point of my growing paranoia. Their routine was flawless, almost robotic. David would water the lawn at precisely 6 a.m., rain or shine, even when the grass glistened with morning dew. Emily would prune the rose bushes with surgical precision, never a leaf out of place. They moved with an unhurried grace, as if they were performing a sacred ritual, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the invisible tension that now hummed in the air around their property. Their lawn, that emerald carpet, had transformed in my mind. It was no longer just a patch of grass. It was a veil, a skin stretched taut over something monstrous. Its perfection, once admirable, now seemed grotesque, a deliberate act of concealment. What did they do to maintain such unnatural vibrancy? What lay beneath it that required such vigilant camouflage? My own yard, once a source of pride, now felt tainted. The grass, though healthy, seemed dull, lifeless in comparison. I started noticing things, small things at first. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the ground when I walked near the spot where I'd had my unsettling experience. A fleeting shadow at the corner of my vision, gone before I could properly focus on it. The distinct smell of freshly turned earth, even when no one had been digging. One evening, as dusk settled, I was watering my own small flower bed. My back was to the Miller's house, but I felt David Miller's presence. I didn't hear him, didn't see him, but I felt the weight of his gaze. When I turned, he was standing on his porch, a watering can in his hand, though his lawn was already glistening. He wasn't looking at me directly, but at my flower bed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone observing a minor imperfection, an anomaly in an otherwise perfect tableau. My heart hammered against my ribs. He knew, or at least he suspected. My intrusion had not gone unnoticed. The next morning, I woke to find a small patch of my prize-winning petunias shriveled, their vibrant purple petals turned to brittle brown. It was localized, just a small circle, as if something incredibly hot had been placed there, or something vital had been sucked out. There was no explanation, no pests, no blight on the surrounding plants. Just that one dead circle, a stark contrast to the healthy blooms around it. I stared at it, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Was this a warning? A subtle demonstration of power? I started avoiding eye contact with the Millers, but I couldn't stop watching them. I'd catch glimpses of Emily tending to her roses, humming a tuneless melody, her movements economical and precise. Sometimes she'd pause, her head cocked slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. And then her gaze would drift, not directly to my house, but to the general vicinity of my property. It was like being watched by a predator that was trying to appear nonchalant. The psychological toll was immense. Sleep became a battlefield. Dreams were filled with images of pulsating earth, grasping roots, and silent, smiling faces. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the scent of damp soil thick in my nostrils, even though my windows were closed. My nerves were frayed, my concentration fractured. I found myself jumping at sudden sounds, my heart racing at the sight of a shadow. I needed answers. The internet, that vast repository of human knowledge and paranoia, became my new sanctuary. I searched for local legends, strange occurrences in the area, anything that might explain the unsettling feeling, the pulsing earth, the perfect lawn. I found old newspaper articles about the Cul de Sac's development, standard suburban sprawl from the late 70s. Nothing unusual. No ancient burial grounds, no forgotten cults, no reports of strange lights or sounds. But then a single obscure forum post caught my eye. It was old, dated nearly 15 years ago, from a user with a cryptic handle. The post was rambling, almost incoherent, about the ground that breathes and the green hunger in a new development on Willow Creek. My cul-de-sac was indeed built near Willow Creek. The user spoke of neighbors who fed the earth, maintaining a false paradise, while the roots grew deeper. It was dismissed by other users as the rantings of a madman, but to me it was a chilling echo of my own terrifying suspicions. The user mentioned a specific address, long since deleted, but the description of the house, the one with the impossibly green lawn, rang with terrifying familiarity. The post ended abruptly, mid-sentence, almost as if the writer had been interrupted. There were no follow-up posts from that user, just an eerie silence. A new tremor, colder and deeper than any before, ran through me. This wasn't just my imagination. Someone else years ago had felt it too. Someone else had seen the perfection and understood its sinister implications. And then they had vanished, or at least, their voice had been silenced. The next day it escalated. I stepped out onto my porch to retrieve the morning paper, and something crunched under my bare foot. I looked down. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, painted a vibrant blue. It was one of the small decorative pieces I had hung in my backyard, nestled amongst my rose bushes, a gift from my late grandmother. It had been snapped cleanly in half, as if by immense pressure, and placed deliberately on my doormat. My breath hitched. This was no accident. This was a message, a clear, undeniable intrusion. They had been in my backyard. They had touched something deeply personal to me, and they had broken it, leaving the pieces as a warning. I looked across the cul de sac. David Miller was on his porch, holding his watering can, his back to me. Emily was nowhere in sight, but I knew they were watching. The perfect lawn, shimmering in the morning sun, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its emerald blades whispering secrets I was not meant to hear. The game had changed. The monster wasn't just noticing anymore. It was playing, and it had just made its first move. The game had changed. The monster wasn't just noticing anymore. It was playing, and it had just made its first move. That night, sleep was a battlefield. Every rustle of leaves outside my window, every creak of the old house settling, sounded like the prelude to something terrible. I tossed and turned, replaying David's unnerving stare, the almost imperceptible shift in his posture, the way his perfect lawn seemed to ripple with a silent, taunting energy. I kept seeing the image of his pristine yard, not as an achievement but as a weapon. How could something so beautiful feel so utterly menacing? The first rays of dawn brought no comfort. Instead, they painted my bedroom in hues of dread. I dragged myself out of bed, my mind a fog of paranoia and exhaustion. Jessica was still asleep, her breathing soft and even, a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. I needed coffee. I needed to clear my head. I needed to convince myself that I was overreacting, that David was just a meticulous homeowner, and I was just an overly imaginative neighbor. But as I stumbled towards the kitchen, a glint from the front window caught my eye. It was from outside, reflecting the early morning sun. I paused, my hand already reaching for the coffee maker, and walked to the window. My breath caught in my throat. My blood ran cold. My lawn. It wasn't just mowed. It was perfect. Not the kind of perfect I might achieve after an hour of diligent work with my old push mower. This was David's kind of perfect. Every blade stood at an identical, unnatural height. The edges, which I usually struggled to keep neat, were razor-sharp, precisely delineating the concrete path from the vibrant green. There wasn't a single stray leaf, a single errant weed. It looked like a miniature golf course, impossibly flawless, unnervingly pristine. But I hadn't touched it. Not yesterday, not the day before. I'd been so consumed by David's yard that my own had been neglected, a shaggy, slightly uneven testament to my distraction. Now it was a mirror image of David's obsession, a terrifyingly precise replica. Panic seized me, cold and sharp. Someone had been on my property. Someone had been in my yard, in the dead of night, meticulously transforming it while I slept, totally oblivious. And I knew exactly who. This wasn't a prank. This was a message, a declaration. The monster wasn't just playing. It had walked right into my home, metaphorically speaking, and left its calling card. I rushed outside, my bare feet hitting the dew-kissed grass. It felt alien beneath my soles, too soft, too uniform. I scanned the perimeter, my eyes darting frantically. The gate to the backyard, which I always kept latched, was slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. He had been in my backyard. He had walked right up to my house. There were no footprints, no tire tracks in the soft earth bordering the driveway. Whoever did this was either incredibly careful or possessed an otherworldly ability to move without a trace. It was as if the perfection itself had materialized out of thin air. I looked across the cul-de-sac. David's house. His lawn, as always, was a verdant carpet, shimmering under the rising sun. And there at his window stood David. He wasn't waving, wasn't smiling. He was just watching me. His expression was unreadable, but I felt the weight of his gaze, a silent, triumphant acknowledgement. He knew I knew, and he wanted me to know. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. This wasn't just about a lawn anymore. This was about control, about intimidation. He was telling me, in the most chillingly subtle way possible, that he could get to me, that he could invade my space, and I wouldn't even know it until his work was done. I went back inside, my mind racing. I had to tell Jessica. She'd think I was losing it, but how could she deny this? The evidence was right outside our window. I tried to calm myself, to think rationally. What did he use? How did he do it so quietly? Jessica woke up as I was trying to brew coffee with shaking hands. "Morning, Michael," she mumbled, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You're up early." "Jessica," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You need to see this." She frowned, sensing the urgency in my tone. "See what?" I led her to the front window, my hand trembling as I pointed outside. "My lawn." She looked, then blinked. Her expression shifted from sleepy confusion to mild surprise, then to utter disbelief, and finally a dawning horror. "Oh my God, Michael," she whispered, her eyes wide. "What happened?" "He happened," I said, my voice raw. "David. He came onto our property last night. He cut our lawn. Or did something to it. Look at it, Jessica. It's perfect." She stepped closer to the window, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. "But how? Why?" "To send a message," I replied, running a hand through my hair. "To tell me he knows I'm watching. To tell me he can get to me whenever he wants." Jessica turned to me, her face pale. "This is insane, Michael. We need to call the police. This is trespassing at the very least." "And say what?" I countered, my frustration boiling over. "That my neighbor made my lawn too pretty? They'd laugh us out of the station. They'd think I'm delusional." "But the gate was open," she insisted. "That's proof someone was here. And he'll just say he was being neighborly, trying to help out a struggling yard," I said, picturing David's innocent, slightly bewildered face. "He's too smart for this, Jessica. This is a game, and he just upped the ante." We spent the morning in a state of agitated disbelief. Jessica, though scared, was now fully on board. The undeniable evidence of our impossibly perfect lawn had shattered her skepticism. She walked the perimeter with me, searching for anything, any clue that could explain how David had done it, or what he might have used. That's when I found it. Near the back fence, almost hidden beneath a rose bush, was a small, almost imperceptible patch of soil. It was different from the rich, dark earth of my garden. This soil was a strange, almost luminescent gray, fine and powdery, clinging to the blades of grass around it, and mixed within it were tiny, almost microscopic iridescent flecks. It looked like crushed minerals, sparkling faintly in the morning light. I knelt, carefully scooping a pinch between my fingers. It felt cool, almost unnatural. It wasn't fertilizer I recognized. It wasn't peat moss. It was something else entirely. Something alien. "What is it?" Jessica asked, peering over my shoulder. "I don't know," I murmured, my mind already racing. "But I have a feeling it's part of his secret." I carefully collected a small sample in a plastic baggie, feeling like a detective in a cheap thriller. But this was no thriller. This was my life, and it was becoming terrifyingly real. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic online research. I typed in every keyword I could think of: unusual lawn soil, iridescent soil additives, perfect lawn secrets, gray soil minerals. Most results were mundane, but one particular rabbit hole caught my attention. It was an obscure forum dedicated to extreme horticulture, to the cultivation of plants that defied nature, that grew in impossible conditions, that seemed to thrive on something else. The forum mentioned rare earth minerals, bioengineered substrates, and even ancient, forgotten techniques for soil enrichment, some bordering on alchemy. There were whispers of certain cults centuries ago, who believed that perfectly cultivated land could draw certain energies, or life forces from the earth, or even from living things. They spoke of living soil that required specific, almost ritualistic care, and that, in turn, granted its cultivators something. The benefits were vague, often described as unparalleled vitality, or unseen power. My blood ran cold. Unseen power. Unparalleled vitality. David. His unnaturally youthful appearance, his relentless energy, his unwavering dedication to that flawless lawn. Was it all connected? Was his lawn not just a symbol of perfection but a source? The forum also briefly touched upon certain rare, almost mythical grass species, said to exist only in specific, hidden geological pockets, or to be the result of generations of selective breeding by these ancient cults. These grasses, if cultivated correctly, were said to possess extraordinary properties, incredible resilience, rapid growth, and a unique ability to absorb nutrients, not just from the soil, but from the very air, from the light, and even, some hinted, from the biological decay of other organic matter. A sickening thought began to form in my mind, a horrifying mosaic of implications. What if David wasn't just obsessed with a perfect lawn for aesthetic reasons? What if the perfection was a means to an end? What if his lawn was not just beautiful but hungry? I looked out the window again at David's immaculate green carpet, now bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. It no longer looked like a benign landscape. It looked like a living, breathing organism, a verdant trap, drawing sustenance from something unseen, something unholy. The gray, iridescent soil in my baggie suddenly felt like a piece of a monstrous puzzle. David wasn't just a gardener. He was a farmer. But what or who was he harvesting? The game wasn't just about my sanity anymore. It was about something far, far darker. And I had just stumbled upon a piece of its horrifying truth. My flashlight beam, now a frantic dance, swept across the back wall of the shed. It wasn't solid. A faint seam, almost invisible beneath layers of grime and cobwebs, hinted at a hidden passage. My fingers, trembling, traced the outline. A latch, cleverly disguised as a rusty pipe clamp, gave way with a soft click. The wall slid inward, revealing not just another storage space, but a descent into an abyss of chilling revelation. A narrow concrete staircase, lit by a single dim fluorescent tube, spiraled downwards. The air grew heavy, damp, carrying a faint synthetic organic scent. A smell I now recognized sickeningly from the special blend in the watering system. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of terror urging me forward even as every instinct screamed for me to flee. I had to know. I had come too far. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a chamber that defied logic in a suburban shed. This was no basement. This was a laboratory. Sterile, gleaming, and utterly terrifying. Stainless steel workbenches lined the walls, laden with equipment that looked less like gardening tools and more like something ripped from a bioengineering textbook. Centrifuges hummed softly, their polished surfaces reflecting the eerie glow of digital displays. Beakers and flasks, filled with liquids of varying viscosity and unsettling hues, bubbled gently over induction plates. My eyes darted around, trying to process the sheer audacity of it all. This wasn't about perfect lawns. This was about precision, control, and synthesis. My gaze snagged on a series of large cylindrical tanks, each easily 6 feet tall, dominating one corner of the room. They were made of thick, frosted glass, but I could still discern the faint internal movement of a viscous, faintly glowing liquid within. Tubes, like metallic veins, connected them to a complex network of pumps and filters, snaking up towards the ceiling, presumably connecting to the sophisticated irrigation system I had just examined upstairs. This was David's harvest. Not bags of soil or bundles of vegetables. This was the product. A chill colder than the air-conditioned lab swept through me. What was this liquid? And what was its source? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots, each connection more horrifying than the last. The perfect lawns, the strange, rich soil, the missing people, the placid residents. It was all spiraling into a monstrous tapestry of manipulation. On one of the workbenches, nestled among a meticulous array of pipettes and petri dishes, was a tablet computer. Its screen glowed, displaying a complex interface. My fingers, hesitant but driven by a desperate hunger for answers, tapped the screen. It was unlocked. The interface was a labyrinth of graphs, charts, and data points, all meticulously logged. Tabs labeled yields, process cycles, dissemination protocols, and then, chillingly, source material. I clicked on source material. The screen shifted, revealing a series of dates, each corresponding eerily with the timelines of local disappearances I had vaguely remembered from news reports. Jessica Miller, gone without a trace 8 months ago. Michael Chun, vanished 6 months prior. Emily Rodriguez, just 3 months ago. Each name was accompanied by a string of alphanumeric code, followed by metrics like biosignature stability, essence purity, and substrate viability. Substrate viability, essence purity. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just gardening with people. He was processing them. Not in a crude, violent way, my mind screamed, trying to rationalize, but in a systematic, almost industrial fashion. The missing people weren't just gone, they were here. Or at least their essence was. The perfect lawns. The rich dark soil. The continuous, unnaturally vibrant growth. It wasn't just fertilizer. It was a giant living filtration system, a bioprocessor. The missing people, I now understood with a gut-wrenching certainty, were trapped somewhere beneath the cul-de-sac. Their very presence, their biological life force, their latent energy, was being slowly, systematically, extracted and fed into the earth beneath our feet. The lawns, thriving on this unique, human-derived nutrient source, were not just a cover. They were an integral part of the process. They absorbed something from the hyper-enriched soil, something the special blend I'd seen was designed to catalyze. And then through their roots and cellular structures, they transformed it. The harvest in those glowing tanks was the concentrated, purified byproduct of this grotesque alchemy. This was why the soil was so dark, so rich, so alive. It wasn't just dirt. It was a living, breathing component of a vast, unseen bioreactor, continuously fed by the captive residents of David's subterranean farm. The grass wasn't just growing. It was gorging, its emerald blades a testament to the horror beneath. And the liquid in the tanks? The harvest? The tablet's dissemination protocols tab held the final, chilling piece of the puzzle. It detailed precise schedules for releasing the refined compound into the cul-de-sac's air conditioning systems, subtly misting it into the air, and even horrifyingly, into the residential water supply. This wasn't just a powerful sedative. This was a mind-altering agent, engineered to induce profound contentment, placid obedience, and an almost dreamlike state of blissful ignorance. It explained the residents, their unwavering smiles, their unwavering complacency, their absolute lack of curiosity. They weren't just neighbors. They were David's unwitting, willing subjects, perpetually bathed in the diffused essence derived from the very people he had made disappear. The cul-de-sac wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a self-sustaining ecosystem of control, a carefully cultivated human farm. David wasn't just growing grass, he was growing compliance. He was harvesting peace of mind, not his own, but that of his unwitting subjects, at the cost of others' freedom and life force. My stomach churned, a cold wave of nausea washing over me. Every perfect blade of grass, every manicured hedge, every symmetrical flower bed now screamed with a silent, terrifying truth. The beauty was a lie, a veneer over something utterly monstrous. I had stumbled into the heart of his operation, uncovered the full, horrifying scope of his twisted genius. He wasn't just a gardener, he was a biological engineer, a chemist, a captor, and a puppet master. And I, the nosy neighbor, the inconvenient truth seeker, was now standing directly in his secret, breathing his processed air, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes. The hum of the centrifuges, once a distant drone, now sounded like a predator's purr. The faint glowing liquid in the tank seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. I was trapped not just in his lab but in a nightmare made real. My presence here, my discovery, had just painted a target on my back as large and vibrant as David's perfect lawn. I had to get out. I had to warn someone. But who would believe me? And how could I escape the gaze of a man who controlled every blade of grass, every drop of water, and every thought in the cul-de-sac? The walls of the lab, once a sanctuary of discovery, now felt like the walls of my tomb. The walls of the lab, once a sanctuary of discovery, now felt like the walls of my tomb. Days blurred into a suffocating cycle of dread and forced normalcy. Every morning, I'd wake with a jolt, the image of Henderson's knowing smile branded behind my eyelids. Emily, bless her oblivious heart, would hum about the beautiful weather, completely unaware that our perfect cul-de-sac was a gilded cage, and I, its newest prisoner. I tried to act normal. I went through the motions of my usual routine, but every interaction felt like a performance. Every casual wave from a neighbor, every friendly chat about the weather or the kids, felt laden with a sinister undertone. Were they all in on it? Were they just puppets, their minds subtly swayed, their wills gently eroded by whatever Henderson was pumping into the soil, into the very air we breathed? The thought was a chilling whisper that echoed in the empty spaces of my mind. My research, once a passion, now felt like a desperate scramble for survival. I spent hours in the lab, poring over the data, the nutrient profiles, the soil analyses. I reran experiments, cross-referenced everything, searching for a flaw, a contradiction, anything that would expose Henderson's grand deception. The initial findings were undeniable. The growth accelerant, the neurological agents. But how were they dispersed? How did they affect people? And how could I prove it without sounding like a raving lunatic? I started documenting everything. I used my phone to take discrete photos of the irrigation system controls, the nutrient tanks, the strange, custom-built filtration units Henderson had installed. I recorded my observations, whispering them into a voice memo app late at night. Hidden under the covers, the flashlight beamed a tiny rebellion against the oppressive darkness. I knew Henderson had cameras, knew he had eyes and ears everywhere, but I had to try. Every fiber of my being screamed that I was being watched, that he knew what I was doing, but the alternative, doing nothing, was unthinkable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the cul de sac in hues of orange and purple, a strange sight caught my eye. David, our usually jovial neighbor from across the street, was meticulously pruning his rose bushes. Nothing unusual there, except for the intensity in his gaze, the almost mechanical precision of his movements. He wasn't just pruning. He was sculpting, as if every single petal, every thorn, had to conform to an unseen, unyielding standard. His face was devoid of its usual warmth, etched instead with a blank, almost serene concentration that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the same look I'd seen in Henderson's eyes when he spoke of perfection, the same unsettling calm. I remembered the early days, before the lawns became perfect, before Henderson arrived. David used to complain about his roses, about their stubborn refusal to bloom evenly. Now they were a perfectly symmetrical explosion of crimson, and David, their gardener, seemed to have lost a part of himself in their cultivation. The next day, I found myself drawn to Henderson's house. I knew it was dangerous, but a desperate curiosity gnawed at me. I needed to see more, to understand the nerve center of his operation. I watched him from my kitchen window, sipping a coffee I didn't want, my heart thumping against my ribs. He was in his immaculate front yard, kneeling by a patch of grass, not pruning but almost listening. He ran his fingers through the blades, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. It was chilling. He wasn't just maintaining his lawn, he was communing with it. Later that afternoon, a package arrived for Emily. It was from Henderson, a small, elegantly wrapped box. Inside was a rare, exotic orchid, its petals a vibrant, almost unnatural shade of blue. Attached was a card, handwritten in Henderson's precise script. "For your beautiful home, a touch of perfection." Emily was delighted, placing it on the coffee table, admiring its unusual beauty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a gift. It was a message, a reminder of his reach, his pervasive influence, his ability to introduce perfection into our lives, whether we asked for it or not. And the blue, that vibrant, almost electric blue, reminded me of the color of the liquid in one of the tanks in his lab. The paranoia was a suffocating blanket, but it was also a sharpened tool. I started to notice things I dismissed before. The subtle flicker in the streetlights near Henderson's property at odd hours. The occasional, barely audible hum that seemed to emanate from his garage. The way the other neighbors, once chatty and outgoing, had gradually become more reserved, more focused on their own perfect little worlds, their conversations often circling back to the impeccable state of their lawns or the latest community improvement Henderson had orchestrated. They weren't hostile, just distant, their eyes holding a peculiar, glazed-over quality when you tried to discuss anything beyond superficial pleasantries. I felt like I was screaming into a void. I tried to subtly broach the subject with Emily. "Don't you think Henderson's a little intense about his gardening?" I asked one night, trying to keep my voice light. She just laughed. "He's just passionate, honey. Look at our lawn, it's never been healthier." Her response, so innocent, so trusting, only reinforced my isolation. How could I tell her that the very health of our lawn might be slowly poisoning us? The lab became my sanctuary again. But this time it was a sanctuary for a desperate man. I needed more than just data. I needed a way to prove the human impact. I needed a sample, a human sample. The thought was horrifying, but I couldn't shake it. If his compounds were affecting the neural pathways, there had to be a trace. But whose? And how? Then a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Back when Henderson was first installing his elaborate irrigation system, he'd needed access to the main water line, which ran through the edge of our property. He'd left a small access panel, disguised by a decorative rock. I remembered him saying something about routine maintenance access. It was a long shot, but what if that access point wasn't just for water? What if it was a point of entry or a point of distribution for something else entirely? Under the cover of darkness, armed with a small toolkit and a pounding heart, I crept out to the edge of our lawn. The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers, a scent that now felt cloying artificial. I found the rock, heavier than I remembered, and carefully shifted it aside. Beneath it was a small metal panel, secured with a simple latch. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a tangle of pipes and wires. But among them I saw it. A smaller, thinner tube not connected to the main water line, but snaking off into the earth, heading directly towards the center of our lawn. And then I saw the needle-thin conduit, barely visible, running from that tube, directly into the exposed root system of a particularly lush patch of grass. It wasn't just irrigation, it was direct injection. And right next to it, almost invisible in the dim light, was a tiny clear vial, attached to a miniature pump. It was empty, but a faint iridescent residue clung to its inner surface. The same iridescent blue as Emily's orchid. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't just about the grass. This was targeted. This was precise. This was how he was delivering it, not just through the general irrigation, but directly into the heart of each lawn, each home. And if I could collect a sample from that residue, I could finally prove what I suspected. I could finally expose the truth. But as I reached for the vial, a sudden sharp click echoed from the direction of Henderson's house. The porch light flickered on, illuminating the cul-de-sac. My blood ran cold. Had he seen me? Was he watching? I froze, my hand hovering just inches from the empty vial, the iridescent blue glinting menacingly in the sudden light. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I was caught. Looking for something, neighbor? The voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the frantic pounding in my chest like a shard of ice. I froze, my hand still inches from the empty vial, the iridescent blue now seeming to pulse in the sudden, harsh glare of the shed's overhead light. Robert stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette momentarily obscuring the twilight outside, before he stepped fully into the shed. He wasn't wielding a weapon, he wasn't shouting. His hands were clasped loosely in front of him, his posture eerily calm, almost serene. That was far more terrifying than any rage. He closed the shed door behind him with a soft click, plunging us into the contained artificial light. The scent of damp earth and that sickly sweet, metallic odor intensified, suffocating me. His eyes, usually hidden behind the brim of his hat, were sharp, unblinking, and utterly devoid of warmth. They seemed to take in every detail: my trembling hand, the empty vial, the disarray I had caused in his meticulously organized space. "This," he said, his gaze settling on the vial, his voice still unervingly level, "is what you've been searching for, isn't it?" He took a slow, deliberate step towards me, then another. The secret. The key to true perfection. My mouth was dry. My mind raced, searching for an excuse, a lie, anything. But the truth was stark and undeniable. I was caught red-handed in the heart of his secret. I just wanted to see what it was. I stammered, the words catching in my throat. He chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "See what it was? Or confirm your suspicions?" He reached out, his fingers brushing past mine to retrieve the empty vial. His touch was cold, impersonal. He held it up, letting the faint blue residue catch the light. "You've been a busy little bee, haven't you? Watching, poking around, asking questions." I noticed. Always watching. A chill snaked down my spine. He had known. All this time, he had been aware of my every move, my every suspicion. The casual encounters, the sudden appearances, they hadn't been accidental at all. He had been observing me, perhaps even orchestrating my path to this very moment. "Nature," he began, turning the vial slowly in his fingers, his voice taking on a detached, almost academic tone, "is fundamentally flawed. Full of decay, disease, entropy. It's a chaotic, wasteful system. Always dying, always struggling for life, only to die again." He gestured vaguely around the shed, then towards the outside. "Look at the other lawns in this cul-de-sac. Patchy, infested, a constant battle against weeds and pests. A reflection of the lives lived upon them, perhaps." He paused, his eyes fixed on me, as if expecting me to agree with his dark philosophy. "But what if you could transcend that? What if you could achieve a state of pure, unadulterated perfection? A system that is self-sustaining, eternally vibrant, immune to the ravages of time and the imperfections of nature. My blood ran cold as the pieces clicked into place, forming a horrifying picture. This blue solution, I managed, my voice barely a whisper. It's not just a fertilizer, is it? A thin, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. No, my dear. It is an agent of transformation, a highly evolved, genetically engineered microbial colony. It consumes all organic matter it encounters, breaks it down to its most basic components, and then it rebuilds. It converts chaos into order, decay into life. Perfect life. He held the empty vial up again. The iridescent blue you noticed? That's its lifeblood, the engine of its pure, relentless growth. My mind flashed back to the unnatural green of his lawn, the strange absence of insects, the peculiar smell. It wasn't just a chemical, it was a living, consuming entity. It needs sustenance, of course, he continued, his voice growing almost lyrical. A highly efficient organism requires a steady supply of raw material, and the cul de sac, with its endless cycle of waste and neglect, provides plenty. His gaze drifted, as if seeing beyond the shed walls, into the yards of our neighbors. People discard so much. Old furniture, yard waste, even their unwanted possessions. All biomass. All fuel for the perfect cycle. A horrifying thought solidified in my mind, making my stomach churn. The missing pets. David and Emily's cat, Luna. Michael and Jessica's dog, Buster. They hadn't run away. They hadn't been stolen. Sometimes, Robert said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling murmur as if reading my thoughts, even a beloved companion reaches the end of its natural cycle. It's a shame to let them simply rot, isn't it? To let their essence be lost to the chaotic decay of the earth, when they could contribute to something truly beautiful, something eternal. My breath hitched. He wasn't just talking about garden waste. He was talking about life, about death, and about a terrifying, unnatural form of resurrection. The perfect lawn was a graveyard, a living testament to his monstrous ambition. And you, he said, turning his full, unwavering attention back to me, the faint smile vanishing. You've seen too much. You understand too much. You've become an impurity in my perfect design. He took another step, closing the distance between us. The shed felt smaller, the air thicker, heavier. A secret like this cannot be shared. It contaminates the pristine. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for flight. I instinctively took a step back, my heel hitting a sturdy workbench. There was no escape. Don't worry, he said, his hand reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small glass syringe, the needle glinting wickedly under the light. It wasn't filled with the blue solution, but with a clear, viscous liquid. It's quick, painless even, a gentle integration. You'll become one with the lawn, eternally green, eternally beautiful, part of something truly magnificent. My mind screamed in protest, but no sound came out. My eyes darted around the shed, searching for anything, any weapon, any opportunity. My gaze fell upon a small, almost imperceptible crack in the concrete floor, near a stack of old potting soil bags. And through that crack, against all odds, a tiny cluster of stubborn, ordinary weeds had pushed their way through. They were small, struggling, but defiantly green, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection Robert envisioned. A flicker of hope, a desperate thought, ignited in the terror. His system wasn't perfect. Nature still found a way. There was a flaw. Your perfection, I gasped, finding my voice. It's a lie. It's unstable. It's a constant battle against everything natural. His face hardened, the mask of serene control cracking slightly. A necessary battle, he corrected, his voice losing its calm edge. For true order, one must impose it. He raised the syringe, taking another step. And you, my dear, will be the next example. He lunged. Adrenaline surged through me, overpowering the fear. My hand instinctively grabbed the nearest object on the workbench, a heavy, half-empty bag of rock salt, used for melting ice in winter. Without thinking, I swung it, a desperate, clumsy arc. The bag connected with his arm, not solidly, but enough to make him stumble, the syringe clattering to the concrete floor, rolling dangerously close to the crack where the weeds grew. He let out a surprised grunt, his eyes widening in a rare display of emotion, anger. You fool! He roared, abandoning his calm facade. He lunged again, this time with pure fury. But I was already reacting. I ripped open the bag of rock salt, plunging my hand inside, then flung a handful of the coarse, white crystals directly at him. He gasped, his eyes stinging, buying me a precious second. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the entire bag, weighing several pounds, and hurled it with all my might at the small, struggling patch of weeds, aiming to hit the syringe as well. The bag burst open on impact, showering the cracked concrete and the desperate weeds with a deluge of white crystals. A sickening, sizzling sound erupted from the floor. The struggling weeds instantly began to shrivel, turning black and brittle. But it wasn't just the weeds. The very ground around them, the concrete itself, seemed to react. A faint, acrid smoke began to rise, and the sickly sweet smell intensified, now tinged with something sharp and corrosive. Robert cried out, not in pain but in horror. His gaze was fixed on the floor, on the destruction of his meticulously controlled environment. The rock salt was not just killing the weeds. It was reacting with something else, something hidden beneath the surface, something vital to his perfect system. A section of the concrete floor, where the salt had landed, began to bubble and crack further, a sickly green foam oozing from the fissures. The air grew thick, suffocating. I had no idea what I had just unleashed, but it was clear I had struck at the heart of his secret. Robert, momentarily distracted by the alarming reaction on the floor, turned back to me, his face contorted with a terrifying mix of rage and despair. "You've ruined it. You've ruined everything," he shrieked, his voice raw with fury. He reached for me, his fingers splayed like claws. I scrambled back, knocking over a stack of empty pots, creating a clatter that momentarily startled him. The shed was filling with the acrid smoke, the eerie sizzling growing louder. The green foam spread, consuming the rock salt, then the concrete, then reaching towards the shelves. This wasn't just a simple chemical reaction. It was a hungry, destructive force. I had to get out. I lunged for the door, fumbling with the latch, my fingers slick with sweat. Robert was right behind me, his heavy footsteps thudding on the concrete. The shed was alive now, groaning and cracking, the perfect order he had imposed dissolving into a terrifying, consuming chaos. The latch clicked open. I burst out into the cool night air, gasping, not daring to look back, my lungs burning, not knowing if I had escaped a madman or something far, far worse. I burst out into the cool night air, gasping, not daring to look back, my lungs burning, not knowing if I had escaped a madman or something far, far worse. My feet hit the pavement, pounding a rhythm of pure terror. I didn't know where I was going, only that it had to be away. Away from the hum, away from the sterile chill of that room, away from the impossible, unsettling calm of Mr. Henderson. The cul-de-sac seemed to stretch on forever, an endless tunnel of manicured lawns and silent, watching houses. Each perfect blade of grass felt like an accusing eye, each symmetrical shrub a silent judge. I ran past Emily and David's former house, the one that had sat empty for so long, then suddenly filled with smiling, unfamiliar faces. I ran past the perfectly trimmed hedges of Mrs. Jenkins, who always waved with that peculiar, fixed smile. My mind was a kaleidoscope of distorted images. Mr. Henderson's serene face, the glint of metal tools, the cold, smooth surface of the hidden room, the almost imperceptible tremor in the floor that wasn't an earthquake, but something else, something controlled. My legs screamed, but adrenaline fueled me. I didn't stop until I stumbled out of the cul-de-sac's entrance, onto the main street, the familiar glow of a street lamp a beacon in the oppressive darkness. My phone, still clutched in my hand, felt impossibly heavy. My fingers fumbled, slick with sweat, as I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? A calm voice asked. I need help, I choked out, still gasping for air. It's the cul-de-sac. Henderson. There's something in their house. Something terrible. My voice was hoarse, ragged with fear. I knew I sounded unhinged, but the words tumbled out anyway. A desperate plea for someone, anyone, to believe me. I gave them the address, my own name, the fragmented, terrifying details of what I had seen and heard. I didn't try to make sense of it, just relayed the raw sensory input. The cold. The hum. The room. Mr. Henderson's calm. Within what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, I saw the flashing blue and red lights approaching. 2 patrol cars pulled up and 2 officers emerged, their faces serious under the harsh glare of the streetlights. Officer Miller, whom I recognized from a local charity event, approached cautiously. "Sir, are you Michael Davies?" he asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Yes. Yes, it's me. You have to go in there. He has a room. Under the house. He trapped me. I pointed a trembling finger back towards the cul-de-sac, which now seemed to hum with a silent, malevolent energy even from this distance. Officer Miller exchanged a glance with his partner, then turned back to me. Okay, Mr. Davies, can you tell us exactly what you saw? I really tried to articulate the horror. The hidden entrance, the descent into the sterile room, the strange, humming machinery, the glint of the tools, Mr. Henderson's chilling composure, his words about perfection and control. I described the meticulous order, the bizarre sense of being observed even in that confined space. They listened patiently, their expression shifting from skepticism to a growing concern. Soon another car arrived, an unmarked sedan, and a man in a rumpled suit emerged. Detective Harding. He was known for his sharp mind and no-nonsense approach. He listened to my truncated, frantic account again, his eyes piercing, assessing. You're saying Mr. Henderson, the one with the prize-winning lawn, has a secret room under his house where he keeps... What exactly? Harding asked, his tone level betraying nothing. I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know. But it felt wrong. Deeply fundamentally wrong. Like he was doing something with people. Or to people. He talked about order. About perfection. The way he looked at me. I shuddered, remembering the predatory glint in his eyes. Detective Harding nodded slowly. Miller, Johnson, secure the perimeter. Mr. Davies, stay here with Officer Miller. We're going in. The scene became a blur of flashing lights and hushed commands. More officers arrived, forming a cautious cordon around the Hendersons' pristine property. It still looked so innocent, so perfectly manicured under the moonlight. The flawless lawn, the symmetrically trimmed bushes, the perfectly aligned stepping stones. A picture of suburban bliss meticulously maintained. Detective Harding, accompanied by a small team, approached the front door. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs, every nerve ending screaming. They knocked. No answer. They tried the handle. Locked. After a brief discussion, a battering ram was produced. The sound of the forced entry echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac, a jarring cacophony against the usual suburban silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I paced, my gaze fixed on the Henderson house, half expecting Mr. Henderson to emerge, calm as ever, and explain it all away. But he didn't. The minutes turned into 10, then 20. My mind raced, imagining what they might find, or what they might not find. Had he cleaned it up? Was I truly going mad? Then, a voice crackled over Officer Miller's radio. Harding to base. We're inside. House appears clear. No sign of occupants. Searching the premises now. My stomach dropped. No sign of Mr. Henderson, or Mrs. Henderson for that matter. Had they vanished? More time passed. Then another message, this time from Harding, his voice tighter, more urgent. Harding to base. We found something. Kitchen pantry. Concealed access point. Looks like Mr. Davies was telling the truth. A wave of relief and dread washed over me simultaneously. Relief that I wasn't crazy, dread for what they were about to discover. Team is descending, Harding continued. Entering a subterranean chamber. Air is sterile. Low hum audible. Stand by. The next update was almost immediate, and Harding's voice, usually so composed, was laced with an undeniable tension. Harding to base. My God, you're not going to believe this. I couldn't breathe. My hands clenched into fists. Officer Miller, sensing my agitation, put a reassuring hand on my shoulder, but his eyes were wide with apprehension. Finally, Harding's voice returned, slower, heavier. We've found multiple chambers. Each one contains a person. They're alive but unresponsive. In a state of induced stasis, it appears. Connected to elaborate life support systems. And they're all familiar faces. The Millers, the Johnsons, the Davids, all the families who supposedly moved away over the past few years. They're all here. Preserved. The words hit me like a physical blow. The perfect families who had simply vanished. Their homes neatly sold, new families moving in. All of them with that unsettling fixed smile. It wasn't that they had moved. They had been collected, preserved, by Mr. Henderson. There's also extensive monitoring equipment, Harding continued, his voice now a grim monotone. High-definition cameras, microphones, biometric sensors. all wired to monitor the entire cul-de-sac. Every house, every movement, every conversation. The perfect lawn isn't just a garden. It's a massive camouflaged sensory array. A control panel, almost. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The subtle hum I'd always felt. The way the cul-de-sac seemed to hold its breath. The unnatural quiet. It wasn't just a quiet neighborhood. It was a monitored one. The perfect lawn wasn't just for aesthetics. It was a sophisticated surveillance system. A digital nervous system for Mr. Henderson's twisted dominion. He hadn't just cultivated grass. He had cultivated an entire community. A living experiment, observing, controlling, and when necessary replacing its inhabitants. "We've found Mr. Henderson," Harding announced grimly. He was in a separate monitoring room, surrounded by screens displaying real-time feeds from every corner of the cul-de-sac. He didn't resist, just smiled, said something about maintaining the optimal environment. "He seems proud of his work." My blood ran cold. The man who had trapped me, who had calmly explained his pursuit of perfection, wasn't a madman in the conventional sense. He was something far more chilling. A meticulous, detached architect of human lives. A curator of a living, breathing dollhouse. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Emergency medical teams arrived, carefully extracting the unresponsive residents from their individual stasis chambers. I watched as familiar faces, people I'd seen wave from their porches, people I'd shared polite conversations with, were brought out on stretchers, their bodies still, their eyes closed, their lives suspended in a horrifying tableau. Emily and David, their faces pale and serene, were among them. The cul-de-sac, once an emblem of quiet perfection, was now a crime scene. Forensic teams swarmed the Henderson property, meticulously documenting the horror beneath the perfect lawn. The pristine grass was trampled by boots, the carefully arranged flowers disturbed. The illusion of perfection had shattered, revealing the grotesque reality beneath. Mrs. Henderson was found in their master bedroom, also in a state of induced stasis, connected to a less elaborate, almost personal version of the life support system. It seemed even his closest companion was part of his controlled environment, perhaps a willing participant at some point, or perhaps his first collection. In the days that followed, the story broke, sending shockwaves through the quiet town and beyond. The cul-de-sac curator, as the media dubbed Mr. Henderson, became a national sensation. Psychologists debated his motives. Sociologists dissected his methods. He was a man obsessed with control, with an idealized vision of community, a vision he was willing to enforce through the most invasive and terrifying means imaginable. He didn't want a perfect lawn. He wanted a perfect world, a perfect life, and he believed he had the right to engineer it. The residents who were rescued slowly began to recover, though the psychological scars would undoubtedly last a lifetime. Some remembered fragments, hazy dreams of being watched, of a pervasive quiet, of a sense of timelessness. Others remembered nothing at all, waking up to a world that had moved on without them. Their lives paused, their memories a blank slate. I moved out of the cul-de-sac a week later. I couldn't bear to look at the perfect lawns, the symmetrical houses, the lingering shadows of what had been. Every blade of grass felt like a wire, every window a lens. My wife Sarah understood. She had seen the terror in my eyes, heard the tremor in my voice. We bought a small house on the other side of town, far from the manicured lawns and the silent, watchful homes. Sometimes late at night I still hear it. The faint, almost imperceptible hum, the sterile chill of a hidden room. And I see Mr. Henderson's face, serene, unrepentant, his eyes holding the chilling truth, that perfection is often just a mask, hiding a darkness far more profound than any simple imperfection could reveal. The perfect lawn had indeed hidden a secret that proved the most terrifying monsters aren't always found in shadows, but sometimes in plain sight, meticulously tending their gardens, cultivating their twisted dreams of perfect control. And I wonder how many other perfect lawns out there are hiding their own unspeakable truths. How many other quiet cul-de-sacs are merely stages for someone else's terrifying silent play? The thought still sends a shiver down my spine, a permanent resident in the quiet corners of my mind.